everybody. Sulos here in Atlanta, and we are about to get started on the next session. Hopefully you're filling out those surveys, and we're going to get started with Philip Blue. He's ready to talk about the 7 test automation mistakes to avoid. I've known Phil for, I think, about 5 years. I met him here when he came to speak at AQAA in Atlanta, and his background is he was in corporate America in the beginning, and he decided to do the entrepreneurial side of things and make his own company. And his company does QA, of course, specifically in the financial and healthcare industries. And he is also currently the program chair for the Pacific Northwest Software Conference. So Phil, take it from there.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good day so far. Let's see if we can kick this thing off. Here we go. You ready? Here we go. Let's see here. Okay, here we are. Okay, so it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, AQAA. As Sue mentioned, I went to Atlanta several years ago, at least 2-3 times, and gave talks there. And today's talk is about the 7 test automation mistakes to avoid. And as the previous speaker was discussing, actually a couple speakers have talked about automation and where it's going and so on. And I recently was, one of the things about COVID is that I've actually ridden my bike now 135 days in a row because, working at home, what else can we do? But I was riding the other day with a friend of mine and he crashed. And I said, well, there's 2 kinds of bike riders. There's those that have crashed and those that will crash. And unfortunately, now we're both in the have crashed. And so what thought I would do today would be to share some of my experiences in test automation and how to avoid crashing, basically. So this came about because from a LinkedIn post, one of my colleagues, Mark Benson, said that the number one reason that test automation or QA managers get fired was failed test automation efforts. So I wrote a blog on the different reasons for failure in test automation efforts, and it got a lot of shares and questions and so on. And I thought I would just do a talk on it. Just a tiny bit about myself. Sue already introduced me as an entrepreneur. I also consider myself a student. I'm always trying to learn new things, and a software QA enthusiast, as well as a cycling nut, which you've probably figured out already. When this whole COVID thing hit, I started thinking about it. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, in that I don't think that the risks have gone down any at all, but that we've started to change our behavior. We've started to adapt. And I think of COVID kind of like a bear outside our cave. And initially, when we discover that there's a bear, what do? Well, we stay inside. But we figure that we can't do that forever, so we adapt and we learn when the bear is sleeping, when he's away eating, and so on, and we start adapting. And I believe that's really what we need to do in our test automation and in the way that we approach our jobs as QA engineers, and really thinking about how we can adapt. And I truly believe that automation is going to be a more and more important part of every industry, because robots don't care about viruses. They don't care about being 6 feet away, and they don't need masks, but they do need software to operate, and that's where we come in. I thought that I would share some of my experiences in terms of crashing on a bicycle. Actually, every time I've crashed, it's because of my own fault. And I could blame it on something else. Oh, this happened, or this guy did this, or whatever. But really, the bottom line is that it was my fault. And so some of these principles really carry forward into many other things besides just bicycle riding, but test automation and life in general. So I thought I'd share some of these things with you. As I said, this started off from a LinkedIn post that my friend Mark Benson posted about the number one reason that QA managers get fired or lose their jobs is about failed test automation efforts. And I've had firsthand in experience and witnessing some of this. And so I thought I'd share with you some of these tidbits of advice. And I kind of transformed this into 7 habits because I really love Stephen Covey and his book on the 7 habits of highly effective people. And I'll go through each one of these different things, different habits, as we go through the presentation today. The first one is setting unrealistic expectations. And I recently read a book on that. Hope is not a strategy. So I thought I'd put this in here, in terms of, just praying and hoping that things are gonna turn out. That certainly is not a strategy, and it certainly is not good at setting expectations. So what is the wrong way to set expectations? Well, the first thing, thinking that automation can do it all. And I've worked with many clients that really, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is they want to set a certain percentage of automation, or they think that automation can do everything, or that they don't really quite understand that automation takes people to do. And not everything can be automated. So that's one of the things that we as QA managers, QA engineers, director of R&D even have to deal with in terms of management, setting their expectations very, very high that automation is going to be the magic bullet, and it just isn't. And so you notice some color coding I've done in the presentation. Red means bad, right? And green means good. So here's the red in terms of setting unrealistic expectations. And the green, well, the green is have a strategy and approach, and be clear about what it is, why that you want to automate. Why is it that we're automating? And I think a lot of times people just focus on, we want to automate 70% of our tests, or 70% of this or that, and not really thinking about the real end goal. As Bob Cruz was talking about, you talked about risk management. And one of the key objectives of test automation should be reducing risk, right? In terms of what parts of the software have a decrease in the probability that those parts are broken when we update the software. Or perhaps being able to reduce manual time on some tests that are prone to error when doing manually, and using that time to allocate to other efforts. A lot of different things. We recently just heard from the last speaker on platform coverage and these device farms and so on. So that's another reason that you would want to automate. But just blindly setting goals and numbers is not a good idea. So what are your reasons for automation? So I think that if you're going to undertake a automation effort, think about what your reasons for automation are, and use that to tie into your reporting, because your reporting in the end has to tie into your reasons. So if you're reporting test cases failed or test scripts failed versus passed, I'm not sure that really ties into any kind of a reason. And perhaps you can tie it somehow to an objective, but think about how you're going to do that. Automating the wrong things. That's another one that we often go down that path when we try to achieve a percentage. And a lot of times we will convert existing regression tests 1-for-1 into automation tests, and that's definitely the wrong way to go. I've seen companies take these huge test cases and convert them to test automation scripts. Another bad thing. You'll see on the fifth bullet point there, I mentioned again in terms of automating 90%. And perhaps one of the things that I like to think about is don't automate things that aren't meant to be automated. Things that are difficult to automate, maybe those could be done in 5 minutes when doing with your bare hands with manual testing. What have you got to lose? Well, you could lose a lot sometimes. So like I was saying, it's important to understand your risks, whether or not you have comorbidities or that you're going to die if you take this particular kind of medicine. Um, the same thing with your software, right? So what happens if these test cases fail? And I think that Bob Cruz brought those concepts up in terms of risk management. And this applies to test automation too, because you want to apply test automation in places that are going to reduce your risks. So like I say, automate where it makes sense, have a clear understanding of what you're going to automate and why you should automate, and if it should or should not be automated, right? So if something is constantly changing or if something is very difficult to automate, forget about it. Don't do that. Look for tests that you can automate that you're going to be using over and over and over again. And we've all seen the testing pyramid, and I've talked a little bit about cycling, and I think of this recently. I've been reading a lot about sleeping, actually. And sleeping is actually the foundation of our health, and it really is the foundation of, if you can't sleep, actually sleeping affects the kind of food that you eat, right? And if you don't eat the right food, and if you don't get enough sleep, then you can't exercise either, right? And so when I think about that, and I can it really parallels well with the testing pyramid from the Agile testing book in terms of unit testing being the foundation of your tests, just like sleep is. And API and database testing being the next layer up, and then black box and end-to-end testing being the top of the pyramid, just like exercise. If you don't get the first two right, doing lots of exercise is really just going to break you down and you'll get injured, basically. And so that really applies to test automation as well, as figuring out what kinds of automation to implement and where to put your effort and where to pay the most attention to, as well as having a coordinated approach, right? So maybe you want to have a lot of unit testing that tests specific places in the software and complement that with different other types of testing for different parts of the software. What I like to, when I work with clients on a test automation project, I like to say, the first thing I say is that you can't automate what you don't understand. And so if you've got a lot of coders just doing test automation, converting test cases over to automated test cases, if they don't actually understand the software and how it works and what the user would do in this particular situation, or this particular using these parameters, or say if it's an accounting application at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, if they don't understand these things, then they're not going to write effective tests. So it's important to really understand the software before you do anything. And of course, we get to the people, right? I think one of the most important things that people forget is, of course, ourselves. It's not about the robots. It's not necessarily about the tools, although some folks would say that they are. The tools are important, and they are, but the first is the people. And you can see this is in red here, you know, ignoring the people, ignoring the skills that are currently in-house, ignoring the skills that are needed and how difficult or easy those skills may be able to procure, I guess you could say, in the job market, and maintaining those skills and keeping those types of talented folks on your team. And, you know, if it's a highly competitive market where those types of skills are very much in demand, you may have a hard time keeping them. So, you know, I think that a lot of the things, the factors in terms of getting automation going, people think about the tool, right? And so I think that the previous speaker talked about, you know, codeless versus code-driven automation. And what's important to think about is not only the code or the code lists or the visual comparison and so on, but really how it's going to be implemented and how you will get your data. What kind of data are you going to use? What environments are you going to use? How are you going to spin up these environments and data in an automated way? And then if you have a multi-person project, having coding standards, just like you would for a development project, and just like you would be having independent modules or services in a development project, you still need to have those kinds of similar concepts going in your automation project. And lastly, testing the tests to make sure that they work. Nobody thinks about testing tests, but that's an important part of the maintenance of and upkeep of automation scripts. Connecting automation goals to report. I mentioned this earlier. Oh shoot, I'm on the wrong slide. Okay, so I mentioned earlier about having the right technical skills. And so when you do use a tool and you're bringing a tool in-house, whether it be open source or a commercial tool, it's important to get a trial run and actually use it in-house for a couple of full cycles, actually doing just like you would in a sprint, and coding scripts and running those scripts as part of your CI, getting the results. A lot of times people don't realize that some of these open source tools, while they may be free, they're actually quite difficult, not only difficult to use, but the reporting is often lacking in these tools. Okay, connecting automation goals and reporting on value and results. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make. Like I was saying earlier, you may report on percent automated or scripts that fail versus pass, but is that really what your goal is? What is your goal of automation? Well, your goal is to reduce risk. Your goal may be to cover more of the product. And how will you prove that automation is actually helping you to reach that goal? So don't continually show the percent automated. I think that's if you can walk away with anything from this talk today, I hope that you can walk away with that percent automated really doesn't mean a lot. And I'll tell you why. The reason is that percent, just by nature of math, is a calculation based on a numerator and a denominator. And depending on what you want to put in the numerator and the denominator, you can do all kinds of funny stuff, whatever you want to do to make management happy, to present numbers, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. And eventually, they're going to find out it doesn't mean anything either. And so then you're all going to be down the drain. So incorrect measures of success, just writing scripts. I think it's important to take a look at the denominator. The denominator really is the number of tests that should be automated, right? And that may be half of the coverage of the application, actually. And so you don't want to have this huge number in the denominator that covers the whole application and functions of the application, when a lot of it should not be automated to begin with, right? So in connecting your automation goals to your value and your results, I think it's important to think about the real things that you're trying to do. So when you come up with we need automation. Well, why do you need automation? Well, because we want to be able to test these platforms. Well, did automation do that for you, right? And so you really it really starts from the beginning of why you're doing automation to begin with. And if you don't have those answers clearly, then you should not move forward with an automation effort. I think a lot of folks just move forward on automation because they think it's everybody else is doing it, or they want to reduce headcount or something like that. And um, that's really the wrong way to go, because actually sometimes automation efforts take more headcount in terms of not only writing the scripts, maintaining the scripts, executing the scripts. Um, it's just a lot of stuff that goes into automation other than writing the scripts and thinking about how many test cases we need to automate and so on. So here's some decisions. You know, you want to be able to make decisions from testing. You also want to make decisions from test automation and the results that come out of test automation, right? So, you know, where are the defects occurring? What is causing our scripts to break? You need to get in there and find out and report on those. And, you know, is it an application error or is it a test script error? And if there's a test scripting error, why is that, right? Is this something that we should be automating to begin with? And a lot of times the answer is no, we shouldn't be automating this anyway. So let's take this out of the automation, out of the CI. Should we delay the release? Well, if you configure your automation tests just like you would a set of manual tests that are critical to pass before releasing the software, you can actually use automation tests to actually give you that kind of information and that kind of value, so that you can take that to management and say, hey, you know, we're able to run these tests every day, every hour, and actually able to provide that value, that kind of information with test automation. And I like to, you know, I like to use this in our company and the meetings that we have. Sometimes I say, you know, so what? Now what? Right? So if you're going to present these results, so what? What am I going to do with these results? And I think that that's important to think about. You know, well, we got 94% automated. Well, okay, so what? Right? We did 5 test cases today. So what? Right? How is that helping me to get to my goal? And this brings up another paradigm in terms of the goal question metric, and why I think it's so useful in terms of starting with goals and being able to tie those to questions and metrics that answer those questions. And so, you know, if you don't have a goal, all you have is just a bunch of numbers that don't mean anything. And I hope that that's one of the other things that you take away from today. Oops, we chose the wrong tool. I knew a guy that he unfortunately was let go very quickly because he had chosen some tool. I forgot. But anyways, it didn't work out. And so choosing the wrong tool, it's important to think about all the factors in choosing the tool. A lot of people go down the path of choosing a open source tool, of course. A lot of things to think about. Codeless test automation tools. A lot of folks have been talking about that in terms of self-healing and so on. The problem that we found with codeless and recording type tools is that a lot of times these types of tools are not that flexible in terms of organizing your scripts and keeping them maintained. Free open source, right? So the thing about free open source is that it takes work to get answers when you don't have all the expertise in house, and so that makes you dependent on the community, which is good, you know, if there's a big community to help you. So don't choose an open source tool, because one of the big factors in choosing an open source tool is whether it has good community support. And I mentioned this earlier about test automation tools, especially open source tools, and being able to satisfy your reporting needs. So there are a lot of plugins and add-ons for open source test automation tools. But like I said, they do take work, and you may have difficulty in terms of finding the right reporting tools, the right reporting third-party add-ons to add on to your free open source. So in terms of the green part of what to do instead of the red part, match your organization's capabilities and goals to a process and the tool, right? So get a proof of concept with a trial. Prioritize your problems and goals first, right? What is exactly we want automation to do for us? Sometimes you may need to complement open source with commercial tools. Maybe you'll need a commercial plugin for an open source tool to do the reporting that you need. Maybe you'll need an open source API. I mean, a commercial API to glue some things together. And then lastly, be prepared to adapt your team's skills and knowledge. So you may start off down a path of this particular tool and start venturing off into different ways, and need to deepen your knowledge as well as broaden your knowledge in the different tools. Here's a sidebar. I call it a sidebar on use of playback and recording. I think I mentioned this earlier in terms of using playback, and a lot of times these scripts, and I think that the previous speaker mentioned this in terms of playback and record, you get scripts that are often difficult to maintain and update. And so that's just a word of warning. I think playback and record for certain things can be very good. So this gets back to the first concept in terms of, or one of the concepts I mentioned in terms of thinking about automating where it makes sense, right? You know, Dad always told me to put away my tools. And now I think about that. I think, geez, you know, a lot of times we may spend time about, you know, a quarter of my time looking for tools in my garage because I can't find them. And that really applies to scripts and the way that you manage your scripts and organize them in a structure so that you can find them and use them. And that's one of the problems of a lot of the test automation tools, especially play and record. Automating breaking your pieces of your scripts down into things that you can find and reuse is often quite difficult. And so that's one of the things that you should put into your criteria when you're actually going through examining tools to use for your automation project. Or your automation development project, right, is how can I keep my stuff organized such that I can find it and reuse it? Okay, so budgeting. I think the problem here is that, you know, there's so many parts of the test automation project that people don't think about in terms of time and money. Time and money, you know, you think, okay, we're going open source, but there's a lot of things to consider. And so things to consider would be the time to maintain your scripts. You know, if you have a bunch of scripts that don't run and they won't execute, that almost means reboot, right? And I've seen many companies go through 3-4 times of rebooting their automation effort. And I think, you know, they just didn't think about the amount of maintenance that was needed in either in play and record or a lot of these other automation tools that, you know, maybe do visual comparison. They may seem easy when you get the demo, but they didn't go through the rigor of actually running it through a whole test cycle. Just like when you buy a car, I have my dad's old Mercedes, and supposedly it was free, right? But every time I have to take it in, every time something goes wrong, I have to pay $1,000 just about to get the darn thing fixed. And so a lot of times you have to think about what is really free. And of course, we all know that a Mercedes is expensive to maintain, because when you go to the repair shop, they just say, oh, there's a Mercedes. All right. But you need to think about that when you buy or procure or choose an automation tool as well. Show me the money. I just love that movie, Jerry Maguire. So don't choose a tool just because of licensing costs, right? So think about all the different factors that you're going to have to incur when you're undergoing automation effort. one of the big considerations is, are you going to redo, or are you converting tools, right? Are you going to actually maintain two efforts at the same time, or rewrite all the old scripts into the new tool? Migration is an important cost to consider, along with the specialized staff, right? Those staff that can actually use those tools effectively. And the last one is integrating manual testing with test automation, understanding how they work together and complement each other. I mentioned this before in terms of some folks taking existing regression tests and blindly automating one for one. And I cannot think of a more, a bigger mistake in terms of just blind automation and duplicating what you're already doing manually, and thinking that I guess you could say that you're taking away from the manual denominator and putting it over into the automation denominator. Sometimes, like I said, it just doesn't make sense to automate things. And, you really need to go through the reasons. Actually, it helps you to go through the reasons that you have manual tests as well. And so incomplete integration and thinking about how manual and automation is going to work together is a huge mistake. And so what you need to do is go through the actual functionality of the software and say, okay, well, this one here would really be good for automation. This one here is a little complicated and could change a lot. Let's do this manually for now. And not only that, integrating the results together so that you don't have duplicate coverage, and so that you can see, okay, well, we need to put more attention on these test automation scripts because there's a lot of failures in this manual area. A lot of things to think about in terms of integrating the efforts from manual and test automation. Begin with the end in mind. This also comes from Stephen Covey's book, and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Begin with the end in mind. The end in mind is the organization's objectives for automation. Why are you automating to begin with? And then going through the whole range of figuring out the capabilities that you have, then going on to the tools that you should use based on your organization and your goals, and then getting back to reporting the value that goes and matches with those objectives, right? Going forward, I have dinner once a week with my family and with my extended family due to COVID. And we had a buffet the other day, and I thought to myself, COVID is the end of the buffet. We will no longer have a buffet. Many things are going to change. And I've thought about those changes a little bit and how they're going to affect us in the software world too, right? So we've got all of these things that are happening from mobile payment and online education and homeschooling and 5G and the changes that are happening in the travel and lodging industry. All those are really pushing us towards many things, improving our digital infrastructure, new focuses on security and performance, as one of the folks talked about today, as well as use of AI and automation within our business models and the software that we use. I think that's about it for today. All of these are going to require automation in every way. And I hope that you've learned something, and that this is not your number one reason for getting fired. Hopefully you get fired for something else besides a failed automation effort. You can see that picture there is not very old, but I have a new COVID look, and here I am to take questions and answers if you've got any.
Well, you made us laugh, Bill. Thank you.
Okay.
I don't know that you can see these, so I guess I'll read the first one from Ivan. At the moment, a lot of time is spent on shallow manual checks. I planned for the team to automate the shallow checks to free up time for deeper exploratory testing. Would that be according to your recommendation to not automate one-to-one manual tests, or following your recommendation to combine both for maximum coverage?
Yeah, so I guess the question is it good to automate small checks in order to free up time for deeper, perhaps exploratory testing? And for sure, that's where we like to start. And you could think of that in terms of, oh, we're knocking off the easy stuff, but I don't see any problem with knocking off the easy stuff in order to save time to be used for more complicated things. I think that's a good way to go. And during that process, you can also learn a lot more about your automation tool, and you can throw those things into the build process where they execute all the time, and that really can help you increase the confidence in your software.
And we do have another question. With evolving tools, how do we go about conversion of existing automation to new tools, considering we thought through initially when automating? I'm sorry, this one doesn't make very much sense to me.
Well, yeah, I guess it gets back to one of the things I talked about in terms of the total cost of ownership in converting from an old automation tool to a new automation tool. And I think that one of the ways that we've worked with some of our clients is that we would automate new functionality with a newer tool and then just gradually convert over. I'm not sure that there's a really good answer for this. I'm not sure I really understand the question quite well. Maybe you can help me, Sue.
I didn't either. Let's see. Yeah, that's a good idea. Well, the person who wrote that question in, could you clarify it while we move on to the next question? From Elaine, she says, I have heard a lot of automation failure stories, and you've done a great job highlighting some key don'ts. Do you have an automation success story?
Actually, I have quite a few automation success stories, in terms of really carefully choosing a tool according to your goals and your organization's culture and abilities, and then taking baby steps to automate. Like one of the other folks, the questions they had was, is it good to automate small things first or small checkpoints? That's a great way to get some quick wins in terms of automation. And we've seen those kinds of things where you get those quick wins and then you move on to more complex things, and being able to integrate those simple things first into the pipeline. It really increases your confidence in your software and enables you to have, a winning program, because you just keep building on top of those things, especially if you're able to structure those test scripts in a way that you can reuse them for other things.
Thanks so much, Phil. Oh, a green drink.
Yeah, this is my latest is matcha, and I've been learning all about different types of matcha lately. If you want to ask me questions about matcha, I'd be more than willing to answer.
Well, that would be good. I'm not seeing any other questions in the box at the moment. So.
All right, great. Well,
When's
thank
your
you
next
very
ride?
much. So I guess everybody gets a break, right? Or is that today the end of the day? I forgot. It's 3:00 here. It's 6:00. Everybody's ready for dinner or happy hour.
That's just about.
Should we just start happy hour now?
We forgot our drinks.
Where? Hold on just a sec.
Someone has a question on matcha.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, it wasn't in the Q&A part. It's in the chat. So did you make your matcha manually or automatically?
Well, I evaluated this task and it wasn't a very good task to be implemented with automation. And my goal was really just to have a well-mixed matcha with no sugar. So I didn't buy, in terms of choosing my automation tool, I didn't buy that pre-mixed stuff that you would have, with lots of sugar and cream and so on. And it's pure matcha. And in my investigations into matcha, there's ceremonial matcha, which is very, very bright green, really interesting. And then there's what they call culinary matcha, which you could use in ice cream or something like that, right? Which is and I tried them both, and it's very, very different flavors, very, very interesting. And I didn't even know you needed to have a special whisk to whisk up your matcha in your cup and everything. And anyways, I have learned a lot about matcha, but I guess there's another question. Thoughts on, is there more questions, Sue?
There is. I was going to read it for you, unless you
Okay.
prefer. So, so Bharat asks, thoughts on best practices for shifting right automation, like checking production transactions and scripting for real-time scenario.
Yeah, actually, that gets into the automating where it makes sense and different kinds of automation. Normally we think of the testing pyramid with unit testing and then API testing and then black box testing on the top. But there's automation prior to the unit test and there's automation after the black box testing, right? And you just mentioned it in terms of you can automate data importing and setting up environments. You can automate on the other side. You can automate production type transactions and then going backwards and looking into your database to see if those worked right. So there's all kinds of automation that you can do that's not within this typical box that we think of as automation. So shift right and left, right?